I am with Anson Veenstra. Anson is the pastor down there. Well, down there from me, maybe up there or left from there. Right. This is
We're right here.
yeah, right,
We're
right there.
right
Look
here
at
in
him.
the center
There he
of my
is.
universe.
Racine CRC. Anson, you've been a busy guy lately, so catch us up a little bit about what you've been up to.
Yeah. As a pastor, I like to hang out with all ages of people, young and old. And so, in addition to my role here as a pastor, have also just enjoyed going with the youth group to Fort Wilderness in the beginning of January. And then a week and a half later, went to California to be with pastors in the third of their ministry career, talking about what it's like to be in this season of our life. And so that was good. Spend a good 4 days out in California with pastors. And then got to come back here and just dive into the local context, which is beautiful and where I thrive. So
you jump from youth ministry to
Yep.
pastors in the third. I won't call you old. We'll say third.
I'm starting to lean into that.
So two questions. What continuity is there between youth ministry at Fort Wilderness and pastors in their third?
So a theme that has been emerging for me is that the cultural context has shifted. And whether you're talking with young people, their cultural context is shifted, and later pastors. We're realizing that the way that we have done ministry has shifted, and we're trying to catch up with those changes that are taking place in the cultural context. So it's a different world out there than what I stepped into 30 years ago. And so God is at work.
The flip side of that question then, so the shifting context is a shared theme there. What is different about spending time with the youth ministry and spending time with pastors in their third?
That is a great question. So I can answer that two ways. One is there's not a lot of difference. We are all on a journey in life and just at different points in our journeys with different experiences. So that commonality is the same whether you're walking with younger generation or older. It's we are all part of a journey. That's the similarities, and then I could also answer that there's a lot of difference. The landscape has changed for all of us, and how we deal with it is different. And yeah, I'm not super great at articulating what I sense, but how I experience it is, if for years we have been if the job of youth ministry, for example, is to walk with young people in their stage and season of life, how do we walk with families to help us to become better at raising kids who engage in the Christian gospel message? Then I feel like it has shifted a lot. And I think for me personally, COVID has brought this to life more and more, where I feel like for years we were very comfortable as long as we maintained some sort of a membership balance. We were okay to just let things ride. But what COVID did in a very practical way is that it suddenly made us realize that if we can't gather together like we used to, then how can we now address a culture whose context has changed? Very practically, and I'm seeing COVID as being a very positive thing in this light, that we had not even considered live streaming as an option. We did that only because we had to. We had to give for 7 weeks early on in the process. We had to continue to present the word. I was preaching to an empty auditorium, and we just said, we're going to do this until we have opportunity to come back together again, which we thought would be in 2 weeks, and then 4 weeks and 7 weeks. And then suddenly we realized that a lot of the people who were attending regularly, young families especially, were no longer saying, now they weren't coming back. And so now we had to address that. So do we force the issue? Do we discontinue live streaming? And so we had those conversations, and it was very interesting. A lot of prayer went into it, a lot of concern, and two things. Just a month ago, we welcomed a new member who said, my connection with your church was through live stream. I was looking for a church. Somebody suggested the Christian Reformed Church. I checked out Kenosha, and lo and behold, it was closed. And so we saw that you guys were live streaming, so we watched you for a number of weeks and then decided to come, which was very interesting to me, because now suddenly we realize that maybe part of our visioning for the future has to be like, okay, how do we do technology better?
Yeah.
So that's just a kind of an interesting kind of a dynamic. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but that's how we wrestle with the changing context.
Yeah. Well, we hadn't planned to talk about live streaming and technology in the church, but I've been having a lot of conversations along the same lines. So if we can stay here for a couple minutes, just help me think through some of the questions we've been asking here. When live streaming enables people to stop gathering bodily together, do I have an obligation as a pastor of this congregation, or even more than that, the guy in charge of tech? Do I have an obligation to shut that live stream down? Am I enabling this really dangerous trend of loosely gathering with the body? And how do I weigh that behavior against the old ladies that I visit? And every old lady I visit says how nice the live stream is, how clear they can see and hear, and they love, more than being able to see it on Channel 14 in Oostburg the next day, they love being able to see it as it's happening. Okay, so the old lady who can't get there, wonderful. You mentioned missionally, right? Your church, by hitting a button, adds a missional dimension to the worship.
Yeah,
that's really cool too. How do I weight that against this scary behavior of, well, I don't really need to be there that often anymore because I hit play at home?
I don't have a specific answer. How I wrestle with it is this. There is a good and bad. I can't speak prophetically. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah.
I do feel like the gathered community is key. You have to have face-to-face conversations with people. Technology is a tool that we have to understand, just like any technology that comes our way, that we have to understand and then figure out how can we leverage what's good about it and be aware of and eliminate what's bad. And so we too have experienced that many members who long to be gathering with us but can't because of age and circumstances have said how nice it is to have this regular diet of people that they associate with and love. On the flip side of that, there are people who now have gotten into the habit of not coming. And so they're gone. And so how do we pastor them? And I think what we've learned is the tone in which we come. We don't go to them and say, why aren't you coming? You're being unfaithful. The tone is more like, okay, where are you at? What's God doing in your life? And how can we walk with you even better? And that's sort of the route. I don't have the final answer to this, but I find that it's made us a little bit more aware, from a Reformed perspective. God is sovereign. There are things happening in the culture. He's not surprised by any of it. And in fact, he's now helping us to change our tone a little bit more. Just generally be a little less pharisaical and a little bit more incarnational, walking with people. And that has been helpful. That's why I say that COVID has been good for us. It's not easy. There's nothing easy about what's happening in our cultural context. We still have to wonder, a lot of the membership on our roll is different than the actuality. We're having to really think about what Sunday school looked like when there's no consistent attendance. When some weeks, we suddenly have everybody coming, and then other weeks, most weeks, the ones that could be there aren't there. So how do we minister in that context? And we're still trying to figure out the answer.
One thing that I think was really good for me, and I hope for our church that COVID did, was it made me realize the ways in which I wasn't functioning as a church. So all of a sudden you realize how much the care committee's doing, when the only people who were getting together was, the care committee was doing all of the pastoral care, and was like, okay, I need to do a lot better job here, because in my mind, like, the worship service was church, and I knew that was wrong, but that's how I was functioning, right? All of my effort is into this hour in the morning, an hour in the evening that we have together, and that's where people are discipled, and that's where the power is, and that's where the fellowship is. And so COVID kind of was a healthy step back to say, okay, but the care committee's performing a really important function of what it means to be church, and I need to put more effort there. That's really important. But then really quickly that swung too far the other way, where now I think the attitude is, before it was the worship service is the thing, that's church, and now it's like, well, the worship service, we learned, is not very important. And so how do you get that back to a healthy place? Like, we went from one extreme to another, and
I think you articulated that very well, Zach. Because I don't know what your care committee is. That's a new concept. How do we continue to care for each other and walk with each other? But how do we then? It still is important to gather. I don't think. I don't know. I wrestle with that, because there are also a lot of satellite churches that are leveraging technology and going into areas, planting churches here and there from remote locations, and so the reach is broader, but is the substance deeper? They have to address that end of the spectrum. Like, how do we continue to care? How do you continue? Somebody is going through a very difficult time as a family. Who walks with them?
Yeah.
And that's a question we always have, but it's now complicated and magnified by technology and our dependence on that. So yeah, it's a good wrestling with that, but no easy answer. But
Well, when you figure it out, send me an email.
Yeah, I will. I'll write a book, and then from the proceeds of that, we'll just yeah.
We had planned on talking a little bit about your sermon series, and I don't know how much time we have left before my free version of Zoom will boot us off, but can you share a little bit about the preaching happening at Racine right now?
Yeah, starting in January, I've started a series on the greatest selling Christian book next to the Bible, Paul Bunyan. Paul Bunyan. I do that a couple of times. I grew up in Iowa, and Minnesota, Paul Bunyan was big, but John Bunyan wrote a book called Pilgrim's Progress, which is an allegory of the Christian life that recently, just before COVID, I re-engaged in that book and realized what a great metaphor that was for the Christian life. God's call on us to leave the city of destruction and travel to the celestial city, which is the pilgrimage of all Christians. And what struck me is that along the way, the constant attacks of Satan, who is opposed to anything that Christ stands for and anybody that's associated with him. So I saw this recently as such a good analogy of our life. As we're called to leave, be in this world, but not of it. What does that look like in real time? We travel through hard times where we wrestle with why, what do I do with this burden of shame and guilt that I have, take it to the hill of salvation, and then, well, what does that mean? Because the life doesn't get easier. No, in fact, it gets harder in many sense, because now we struggle with the battles with Apollyon, which are part of our feast all along the way. We encounter people in our life that say, this is meaningless. Come back. Why do you continue to press on? And so I've just found that to be just a wonderful metaphor of our journey through life. And so we're doing an 8-session series on that should take us to the end of February. And the reviews so far have been good. We've encouraged the congregation to read the book, many of them for the first time. We've had available resources for them to engage in it. And we'll see. It's been very good for us. Maybe fits with this whole journey that we're on in life, and what does it mean to be a Christian in our context?
I don't have too much to offer because I've never read Pilgrim's Progress. We did just mention John Bunyan in my church history class and mentioned the book just in passing. But if you had to enlighten, a guy like me who's not familiar with Pilgrim's Progress, what theology or what aspects of Scripture would it really help bring to life for me? I don't want to say it adds to Scripture or anything like that, but what would it help me understand, do you think?
Well, just the battle that we face in life, what is God's purpose for putting us here on this earth? What is our calling? Why do we have to attend to suffering? Why is there hardships in our life? And how do we find strength and encouragement along the way? It's an allegory. John just wrote this from the perspective in the 1600s of one who was imprisoned because he continued to proclaim the word of God in a context where you have to be part of the state church and a defined way of proclaiming the gospel. And so it's helpful, I think, even though it's coming from a different century, a different time. There are, as an allegory, it just helps us to say, what does it mean to be a Christian in our context, and how do we find encouragement along the way? What does God provide for us? So it's been good.
Yeah. I'm getting a little message on my screen here that's yelling at me about our time. So we've got 10 minutes to talk. I always put the links to churches' live streams conveniently. We had that conversation at the beginning here. So if you want to listen to Pastor Anson articulate that allegory a little bit, you can in the links below. But how can we be praying for you or Racine CRC?
Yeah, I think we're at an exciting juncture in our life. So pray specifically. We're talking about our vision and mission. What does God want us to be? We're going to be having a conversation at our next council meeting with Elaine May of Thriving Essentials, and she is going to talk about the why churches need to have a vision. What does it mean to be a disciple in this context, to fulfill the Great Commission? And so that's a key conversation and an item for prayer, because we are definitely trying to say God is doing some things in our culture. We've lost members, but we've also gained members. So there's kind of a new excitement that is part of our experience right now at Racine. And so what does that mean for us? I think these next couple of months are key. Every congregation can say that, but
Sure.
but we're feeling that. So appreciate prayers specifically for our leadership and for the members that are coming, that we can understand our unique and distinct calling here as a church. And that's exciting. It comes with challenges too. So pray that we may be faithful and to God's call in our life. And so exciting times, key times, and appreciate the prayers.
Thanks, Anson.
Yes.